The flight attendant's hand shot out like a snake, ripping the small rainbow badge off Jonathan's lapel before doing the same to Christian's. "You two brothers need to keep that stuff to yourselves," she hissed, her voice slicing through the cabin as every passenger froze and the entire plane fell into a dead silence. Jonathan rose slowly, his jaw tight, but his voice steady. "We're not brothers," he said clearly enough for the whole cabin to hear. "Christian is my fiancé, and you just crossed a line." Christian's heart slammed against his ribs, the pin still warm in the attendant's fist, now feeling like evidence of a crime. He could feel 100 eyes on them, the low hum of the engines suddenly deafening in the quiet. No one moved, no one spoke. The attendant's face drained of color as the words sank in. A woman in the row ahead clutched her pearls. A teenager pulled out his phone, but quickly lowered it. Jonathan sat back down, his hand finding Christian's under the armrest and squeezing once hard. Christian stared at the torn fabric on his jacket where the tiny rainbow had been a symbol he had pinned on only that morning for courage. Now it lay on the floor somewhere behind them. The silence stretched until the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, apologizing for the disturbance, and the plane began its slow taxi again. But Christian's mind was already miles away, drifting back 2 years to the rainy afternoon in New York when everything started. He had been 26, then working long hours at a midtown marketing firm, wearing the same crisp button-downs his father had always approved of. Christian had grown up in a quiet suburb outside Chicago where Sunday dinners meant football talk and questions about when he would bring home a nice girl. His father, a retired Marine, had never said the words, but the message was clear: men like them didn't cry, didn't hesitate, and sure as hell didn't love other men. So Christian dated a few women in college, enough to keep the family texts happy, enough to convince himself the flutter he felt around certain guys was just admiration. Then came the day he ducked into a tiny coffee shop in Chelsea to escape the downpour. The place smelled of fresh espresso and cinnamon. Behind the counter, a guy with messy dark hair and a crooked smile handed him a latte. "You look like you could use this on the house," Jonathan had said, his blue eyes catching the light. Christian had laughed it off, but when he sat by the window, he couldn't stop glancing back. Jonathan moved like someone who owned every inch of space around him, no apologies. They talked for 20 minutes about nothing: the rain, the terrible subway delays. When Christian left, he carried Jonathan's number scribbled on the cup sleeve like a secret he wasn't ready to read. Weeks passed before he texted. One casual coffee turned into dinner, then a walk along the High Line, where Jonathan stopped under the string lights and asked straight out, "Are you out?" Christian had stammered something about not being sure what that even meant. Jonathan didn't push. Instead, he shared his own story growing up in California with parents who marched in pride parades before he was born. "I got lucky," he said softly. "Not everyone does." That night, Christian went home and stared at his reflection in the mirror, wondering why the word gay still felt like a foreign language in his mouth. He deleted the text thread twice and retyped it. The third time, he hit send. They met again the next weekend and the weekend after that. Jonathan never rushed, never demanded. He simply existed as proof that maybe Christian could be more than the version his family had raised. But every time Christian pictured telling his parents, the words stuck in his throat. So he kept Jonathan hidden like the rainbow pin he would one day wear on a plane 2 years later. The flight attendant returned, now pale and muttering apologies under her breath, handing back the pins with shaky fingers. Jonathan took them without a word, clipping his back on like armor. Christian did the same, his fingers brushing Jonathan's for a second longer than necessary. The cabin slowly resumed its murmur, but the air still felt charged. Christian leaned his head against the window, watching the clouds below, and let the memories pull him deeper. He remembered the first time Jonathan kissed him on a rooftop in Brooklyn, the city sparkling beneath them. It had been soft, tentative, full of the kind of patience Christian hadn't known he needed. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight," Jonathan had whispered against his lips. "Just stay." And Christian had stayed. He stayed through the nights. He woke up panicked, convinced someone at work would notice the way he smiled when Jonathan's name lit up his phone. He stayed through the family holidays where he invented stories about non-existent girlfriends. But the weight was growing heavier, and the wedding invitation from his sister in Los Angeles had been the final push. "Bring someone special," she had written. Christian had stared at those words for days before asking Jonathan to fly with him. "I'm ready," he had said, even though his voice shook. now 30,000 feet above the earth with the rainbow pins back in place, and the whole plane knowing their truth. Christian wondered if ready was ever really possible. The plane leveled out and the seatbelt sign dinged off, but Christian's pulse still raced. Jonathan squeezed his hand again under the blanket the flight attendant had awkwardly offered as a peace offering. "Breathe." Jonathan murmured, his voice low enough that only Christian could hear. "We're okay." Christian nodded, but his mind kept spinning back to the months after that first kiss. They had moved slowly, building something real in the cracks of his double life. Jonathan's apartment in Queens became a sanctuary, books stacked everywhere, camera gear scattered like confetti, and a tiny balcony where they drank cheap wine and talked until sunrise. Christian learned to cook stir-fry just to impress him. Jonathan taught him how to frame a shot with his phone so the city looked like art instead of concrete. Their love was never loud, never flashy. It was the way Jonathan remembered Christian's coffee order, exactly the way Christian left little notes in Jonathan's camera bag before long shoots. But the secrecy ate at Christian like rust on metal. One evening after a brutal day at the office, Christian had shown up at Jonathan's door shaking. "My dad called again," he said, collapsing onto the couch. "Asked when I was going to settle down with a wife and give him grandkids." Jonathan sat beside him without speaking at first, just resting a hand on Christian's knee. "You know you don't owe him that version of you," he said finally. Christian had laughed bitterly. "Easy for you to say. Your parents sent you a rainbow cake on your 18th birthday. Jonathan smiled, but his eyes were serious. "Yeah, and it took me years to believe I deserved it. You'll get there." That night they lay in bed talking about the future in whispers. Jonathan wanted to travel, shoot documentaries about queer stories around the world. Christian wanted to start his own agency one day where no one had to hide who they loved. They made plans that felt possible until the sun came up and Christian had to put on his straight mask again for the commute. The friendship that kept him grounded was with Marcus, his college roommate, who had moved to New York too. Marcus was the kind of guy who clapped Christian on the back and talked sports like it was oxygen. He never suspected a thing, or so Christian thought. They grabbed beers every other Friday, and Christian would invent dates with girls whose names he forgot by Monday. Marcus would laugh and say, "Man, you're living the dream." But the lies started feeling heavier, especially after Jonathan and Christian celebrated their first anniversary with a quiet picnic in Central Park. Christian had worn the rainbow pin for the first time that day, tucked inside his jacket like a heartbeat. Jonathan had noticed and kissed him right there under the trees, no one around to see. "Proud of you," he had said. Christian had felt it, then a crack in the wall he had built. But Marcus's texts kept coming. "When are you bringing one of these mystery girls around?" And the crack sealed over again. On the plane, the snacks arrived, and Jonathan passed Christian the pretzels, their fingers brushing. Christian smiled despite everything. He remembered the night he almost told Marcus. They were at a bar in Hell's Kitchen celebrating a promotion. Jonathan had texted a silly selfie from a shoot, and Christian had smiled so wide Marcus noticed. "Who's got you grinning like that?" Marcus asked. Christian had frozen, then lied, "Just my sister." The guilt had followed him home that night. Jonathan listened when Christian confessed the close call. "You don't have to tell anyone until you're ready," he said, pulling Christian into his arms. "But I'm not going anywhere." Those words had been the anchor. Christian clung to them now as the plane flew west, carrying them toward the wedding and the family that still expected the old version of him. He glanced at Jonathan's profile, the strong jaw, the kind eyes, and felt the love settle deeper. Whatever happened in Los Angeles, they would face it together. The silence from the earlier incident had faded into normal cabin noise, but Christian knew the real storm was still ahead. Hours passed, and the sky outside darkened to deep indigo. Christian closed his eyes, letting the memories play like a movie he couldn't pause. The pressure from home had intensified the year before the flight. His mother's calls always started innocent, "How's work, honey?" then slid into the real question. "Your cousin Sarah just got engaged. She's so happy. When are you going to find someone?" Christian would mumble something about being busy and change the subject. His father was worse. The retired Marine sent articles about family values and asked pointed questions about Christian's dating life during their monthly video calls. "A man needs roots, son. Don't wait too long." Christian would nod and smile, the screen hiding the way his hands trembled. Jonathan never pushed, but he saw the toll. One weekend they drove upstate to a cabin Jonathan had rented. No service, no expectations. They hiked through golden leaves and sat by a fire pit roasting marshmallows. Tell me what scares you most, Jonathan asked quietly. Christian stared into the flames. That they'll look at me like I'm broken. Like I failed them. Jonathan had taken his hand. Love isn't failure, Christian. It's the bravest thing you'll ever do. They made love that night, slow and careful, the kind of closeness that healed more than it excited. In the morning, Christian pinned the rainbow badge inside his jacket again, a private promise. Back in the city, the wedding invitation arrived in a thick cream envelope. His sister Emily was marrying her high school sweetheart in Los Angeles, a big traditional affair with all the relatives flying in. Bring someone special, little brother, she had written in her looping handwriting. Christian had stared at the card for days before showing it to Jonathan. I want you there, he said finally. As my date. For real. Jonathan's smile had been everything. But the fear followed. Christian started having nightmares about his father's face when the truth came out. At work, he avoided the office pride events even though his boss was openly supportive. Marcus noticed the distance. Dude, you've been weird lately, he said over burgers one night. Everything okay? Christian lied again, blaming work stress. The guilt gnawed deeper. Jonathan suggested therapy, and Christian went twice before canceling. I'm not ready to talk about it with a stranger, he told Jonathan. But Jonathan understood. He always did. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, and the cabin lights flickered. Christian gripped Jonathan's hand tighter. He remembered the day they decided to wear the pins on this flight. It had been Jonathan's idea, a small act of courage before the big one in Los Angeles. We're not hiding anymore, he had said, pinning the tiny rainbow on Christian's jacket that morning at the airport. Christian had felt exposed but proud. Now the pins were back in place, but the damage was done. The attendant avoided their row entirely. A few passengers stole glances, but no one spoke. Christian's mind drifted to his sister. Emily had always been his safe person, the one who defended him when their father pushed too hard. Maybe she would understand. Maybe the whole family would. Or maybe the silence on this plane was only a preview of what waited on the ground. Jonathan leaned over and whispered, "Whatever happens, we choose us." Christian nodded, the words settling like a vow. The plane continued west, and the past kept unfolding in his memory, pulling him closer to the moment everything would change. Dawn broke over the Midwest as the plane crossed into mountain time. Christian had barely slept, his dreams tangled with memories of the misunderstanding that nearly shattered everything 6 months earlier. Marcus had shown up at his apartment unannounced one rainy Thursday. Christian had been cooking dinner for Jonathan, who was due any minute. When the knock came, Christian opened the door, still wearing the apron Jonathan had bought him as a joke. Marcus took one look at the 2 plates on the table and the candle Christian had lit and froze. Wait, you're seeing someone? The question hung heavy. Christian tried to laugh it off, but Marcus pushed inside. I saw you with a guy last week near the park. Holding hands. I thought I was imagining it, but now his voice trailed off. Christian's stomach dropped. He had begged Marcus to keep quiet, promised it was new and complicated. Marcus had hugged him hard. I got your back, man. Always. But the next weekend at a family barbecue, Marcus drank too much and let something slip to Christian's cousin. The rumor traveled fast. Christian's mother called in tears. Is it true? Are you confused? Christian had denied everything on the phone, his voice cracking. Jonathan had been there holding him while he cried afterward. He didn't mean to betray you, Jonathan said gently. But secrets have a way of leaking. The friendship survived, but it was never the same. Marcus apologized 1,000 times, yet the trust was fractured. Christian learned then that even the people who loved you could hurt you when fear took over. On the plane, Christian glanced at Jonathan, who was sketching in a small notebook the way he did when he needed to process. The drawing was of the 2 of them, hands linked against a cloudy sky. Christian smiled despite the knot in his chest. He remembered the night after the rumor mess when he had almost ended things. Maybe it's too hard, he had told Jonathan, standing in the kitchen. Maybe I should just go back to the way things were. Jonathan had set down the wine glass, his eyes steady. If that's what you want, I'll walk away. But I think you're stronger than that. The words had stopped Christian cold. He had pulled Jonathan close and whispered, don't go. I choose you. That choice had cost him sleep and peace, but it had also given him something real. The plane began its descent toward Los Angeles, and the memories slowed. Christian could see the city lights now sparkling like scattered jewels. Jonathan closed the notebook and slipped the rainbow pin back onto his jacket. "Ready?" he asked. Christian nodded, though his hands shook. The wheels touched down with a gentle thud, and the cabin erupted in applause, the usual ritual. But Christian knew the real test was just beginning. The airport terminal buzzed with life, but Christian felt detached, like he was watching himself from above. They collected their bags in silence, the earlier incident still echoing in every sideways glance from strangers. Jonathan kept a protective hand on the small of Christian's back, guiding him through the crowd. Outside, the California sun hit them warm and bright. A text from Emily lit up Christian's phone. "Can't wait to meet your plus one." He showed it to Jonathan, who smiled, but the worry lines around his eyes were new. They took a taxi to the hotel near the wedding venue, a sleek modern place with palm trees lining the drive. In the room, Christian finally let the tears come. "What if they hate me?" he whispered into Jonathan's shoulder. Jonathan held him tight, rocking gently. "Then we build our own family." "But I don't think they will. Not forever." That night they lay awake, talking through every possible outcome. Jonathan shared stories of his own, coming out, the tears, the hugs, the slow acceptance. Christian listened, and for the first time felt hope crack through the fear. The next morning they drove to the rehearsal dinner at Christian's parents' rented villa in the hills. The house smelled of jasmine and barbecue. Emily hugged Christian so hard he laughed. Then she turned to Jonathan. "You must be the someone special," she said, eyes twinkling. Christian's mother watched from the doorway, her smile polite but tight. His father shook Jonathan's hand a little too firmly. "Nice to meet you, son." The word son landed like a question. Dinner passed in small talk, but Christian felt the tension building. Later on the terrace, his father pulled him aside. "That young man, he's more than a friend, isn't he?" Christian's throat closed. The truth sat on his tongue, heavy and ready. But before he could speak, his mother called everyone inside for toasts. The moment slipped away. Back at the hotel, Christian paced the room. "I almost said it." Jonathan listened, then pulled him into bed. "Tomorrow. At the wedding. We'll do it together." Christian fell asleep to the sound of Jonathan's heartbeat, steady and sure. The wedding day dawned, perfect blue skies and ocean breeze. Christian stood in his tux, watching Jonathan adjust his tie in the mirror. "You look incredible," Jonathan said softly. They drove to the beach venue where chairs faced the waves. Guests milled about, champagne in hand. Christian's father found him before the ceremony. "Whatever you need to tell us, son, we're listening." The words were simple, but they cracked something open inside Christian. He found Jonathan by the water and took his hand right there in front of everyone. Whispers rippled through the crowd, but Emily smiled wide. The ceremony began, and Christian barely heard the vows. His mind was on the reception, when he would stand up and speak his truth. Jonathan squeezed his hand as if reading his thoughts. The turning point had arrived, not with drama, but with quiet courage on a sunlit beach. The reception glowed under string lights, the ocean singing in the background. Christian stood at the microphone, his heart hammering. Jonathan stood beside him, solid as ever. "I have something to say." Christian began, his voice stronger than he expected. The room quieted. "For years I hid who I am because I thought it would break our family. But love doesn't break things, it builds them. Jonathan is my fiancé. I'm gay and I'm proud of it." The words hung in the air. His mother's hand flew to her mouth. His father's face went still, then softened. Emily cheered, first clapping loud enough to break the tension. Slowly others joined in. His father walked forward and pulled Christian into a rough hug. "Took you long enough, son," he muttered, voice thick. "We love you. All of you." Tears streamed down Christian's face as Jonathan wrapped an arm around his waist. The band started playing again, and the dance floor filled. Christian and Jonathan swayed together under the lights, the rainbow pins catching the glow. Later, Marcus texted from New York, "Proud of you, man. Sorry I ever doubted." The betrayal had healed in its own time. Months later, back in New York, life settled into a new normal. Christian started his own agency, with Jonathan's photos on the walls. Family calls came regularly, now full of questions and laughter. The plane incident had even gone mildly viral, a passenger's video sparking conversations about kindness in the skies. But none of that mattered as much as the quiet evenings when Christian and Jonathan cooked together or walked the city hand in hand. No more secrets. They had faced misunderstanding, betrayal, sacrifice, and truth. And they had chosen each other every single time. Christian looked at Jonathan across the dinner table one night and smiled. The journey had been long, but it had led them home. True or false? One public moment of courage can heal years of hidden pain and rewrite an entire family's future?